Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Thank you and good afternoon. I won't be doing my presentation in French, unfortunately. But thank you to everyone. Thank you, Okazi, for this. And I know this is the last event of the day, so appreciate that everyone has come back in the room from the refreshments. So I think we almost have my PowerPoint up. So briefly, I'm going to talk today and try to keep it fairly brief because I know we want to have time for questions on the post-secondary education sector and immigrant programming and services. And then I will sort of take a deeper dive into what George Brown does specifically as an example, particularly of a GTA college, the kinds of programming and services we have for immigrants. And then briefly touch at the end on some of the challenges we're facing as a sector and at our own institution. So the next slide. So none of these statistics are new to anyone here, but as you know, Ontario has about a 20% foreign-born population. Within the GTA, we're talking about 51% foreign-born. And by some estimates, by about 2031, 80% of our population in the GTA will be either foreign-born or children of foreign-born. So next slide. So what are the options at Ontario colleges? And that's what I'm going to discuss. There are many options, some of which are appropriate for newcomers, some of which are less appropriate, and yet sometimes newcomers are shuffled into those programs. Next slide. I think before I dive into some of that, just to step back and talk about, as the college sector, who we serve. There are 24 colleges in the province, 2 francophone and 22 anglophone colleges. About 58% of our college students are high school graduates, and 42% have previous post-secondary education. So we have a very broad range in our student body. I would much broader than in universities, in the sense that we have many people coming in as mature students without high school diplomas, and then many people, increasing numbers, who have post-secondary education. And in fact, about a quarter of the student body at George Brown, and I think this is reflected at a lot of colleges, have undergraduate degrees from universities and are coming for postgraduate certificates. So that's a growing part of our student body. The colleges in Ontario are a place that newcomers come to for obvious reasons, and they're looking for a Canadian credit, a Canadian college credit, post-secondary credit, but also looking for work experience, and most programs at colleges have field experience attached to them. And then we have about 20,000 international students provincially in the college sector. So next slide. So this is just a map of where the colleges are in Ontario. I'm sure there's a college near you. And if not, there'd be a satellite campus. And I'm sure many of you cooperate already with colleges near you. And if you don't, I hope that that's something you'll consider. There's a lot of wonderful partnerships that happen between colleges and the settlement sector on immigrant programming and services. Largest colleges in the province are over 20,000 students, full-time students, and there are a few that are as small as 1,500. Next slide. So just a sort of snapshot of George Brown. We're one of 6 colleges in the GTA, and we're a large college, about 24,000 full-time students, 60,000 continuing education students, and a wide range of programs over 5 campuses. Next slide. So in terms of our immigrant student body at the college, in our last key performance indicators, we had our student body report that about 44% were foreign-born, so that's just below the 51% of the city, but we're really reflecting the city, I would say, and I think the other GTA colleges are about the same. About a third of the school, 33%, identify their English as their second language, but then out of that, we also have quite a few students who we would identify in what we call Generation 1.5, who are students who arrived at a young age, who speak English as a native speaker, but in fact have many literacy challenges because they came here when at a younger age. About 51%, again, of our student body, of the immigrants have post-secondary education already, which is not an unfamiliar, I think, statistic for you. And then we have about 12% international students. Within the institution, though, and within each school of the institution, that varies enormously. We have parts of our school where there are very few immigrants and parts where we have 60, 70% foreign-born students. So, next slide. The way we're organized at the college is similar to a lot of colleges, although there's a lot of variety in this regard. I'm within the Center of Preparatory and Liberal Studies, which has several schools, and we're basically the access division at the school. So we work with underserved populations. We have the academic upgrading programming in our department, and communication. We have programming for deaf and hard of hearing students, and then all of the programming for immigrant students, and as well as was mentioned in the introduction, we also do programming for students with mental health and substance use issues. Not to sort of put all of that side by side, but we are working with students who might need extra supports, which we have in place in this division. And then we also have the School of English as a Second Language. Next slide. Amongst our programming, we have pre-entry, and then programming once students there, and then we have programming to help students facilitate them into the workforce. In terms of pre-entry, a lot of colleges have, and we do as well, entry advising of some sort, some specifically geared towards internationally trained immigrants, and I think that's something that you should investigate if you don't already know about it at a college near you. And that is pathway specialists to help particularly immigrants to navigate the system. At George Brown, we have a program called Choices, next slide, that is a one-week program that is free to the general public, as entry advising is, and helps students to explore personal and professional pathways. So next slide. Other pre-entry programming that we have at George Brown and other schools do, prior learning assessment and recognition, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is a key program at colleges that is always under review and trying to be improved. It's the system by which individuals get credit, a college credit, for what they know rather than what courses they've taken. So they would actually get a credit on their transcript for a course after taking a challenge exam of some sort. This is, as you can imagine, of vital importance to a lot of immigrants who may have done a lot of work in a certain area and not have traditional credits for it, and we can give them those credits. It's something that I think could be expanded provincially enormously. We are involved as well in the Canadian Immigrant Integration Program. We're the focal point partner in Ontario for education advising. That's pre-arrival advising for immigrants. And we work with Costi, who does the settlement advising on that. And we're hoping that program gets refunded for next year and potentially expanded. And then we've been involved in other programs such as the Essential Skills Pilot and Orientation to Ontario. Next slide. So at the heart of programming at colleges, as it is at settlement agencies often, is bridge programming. We have several bridging programs at George Brown, including for nurses, which is our most popular, which we work very closely with the Colleges of Nurses of Ontario. So just to clarify that colleges work very closely with regulatory bodies to be sure that there is a pathway to the workforce for individuals in those courses. We have a program for internationally trained university professors, and then construction management and career and work counselor. But in spite of bridging programs, in which there's a lot of emphasis placed on, and there's a whole sustainability issue with bridging programs, which I know you're all very well aware, which is a larger discussion, how to make bridging programs sustainable beyond their MCI funding. We recognize at colleges increasingly that most immigrants end up in postgraduate certificate programs. And so we're trying to recognize that through looking at introducing more sociocultural programming within those programs, and but also recognizing that there's higher CLB levels required for that sort of programming. The next slide. Recognizing that around post-secondary institutions there are a lot of issues to do with cultural adjustment and just culture in general, we've introduced workshops on Canadian culture, culture of the classroom, and workplace culture. Next slide. And then workplace communication is a key piece of programming at all colleges, and the occupation-specific language training program, which you may be familiar with, is funded by CIC. It's an outstanding program that we've had at George Brown since the beginning. It's in many colleges around the province. It's given in the evenings, which works for the schedule of many newcomers, and helps individuals to acculturate to the workplace rather than just ESL. We also have some of our own programming that's similar to that for nurses. 1 minute. So next slide, I think I'll skip. English as a second language, most colleges have. Next slide. So international students, this is not actually a news story now, but I'll just briefly touch on the fact that international students are encouraged and now there's more facilitation for them to become immigrants. And there's a great interest at George Brown. The survey we did in 2011 showed that up to 80% of our students wanted to stay for at least 3 years. Next slide. But there was a real gap in their knowledge of how to stay. And we do get CIC to come in and do presentations at the school, but I know that's spotty across the college network. So there's a real information gap among international students. They now, I think, are sold the idea that they can stay, and I think we need to provide them more support in that regard. And then, of course, there's the whole settlement piece right now, where there is no support or very little for international students in terms of the settlement piece, as you know. Next slide. Just in terms of Ontario Francophone colleges, just briefly, there are two, as I said, La Cité and Collège Boreal. We do work with them as well. They have other sorts of challenges. They have a different profile of immigrant students, mostly from Africa. And some of their challenges, which they would be far more articulate in terms of going into, involve bilingualism, which is an issue in terms of bringing in a student into a minority environment in Ontario in a Francophone school, but then the realization that speaking English is critical, at least in this province, in most areas of the economy. So that's a challenge for those colleges. Next slide. The college sector, actually go right to the next slide. The College Sector Immigrant Program and Services Committee is a provincial committee I just want to draw your attention to as a sector. We are a committee, I'm the current chair of this committee, which represents all 24 colleges in the province, and we work on immigrant programming and services in the college sector in Ontario. So just so you know that we're there, we're available, we're looking for partners. Often it makes more sense to partner with 1 or 2 colleges in your area, but sometimes provincially makes sense. So know that we are there. And the next slide. We do conferences at CSIPs, and we've also helped to introduce an immigrant page on the Ontario College Application System, which is a critical resource for newcomers. And next slide, which is the last slide, challenges and opportunities right now in the college sector. With the many changes to the point system, I think we're, as you are, waiting to see if the profile of student changes for us. We think that there's opportunity in terms of potentially an increase in workplace communications and soft skills programming. In spite of people coming in with higher CLBs, they will still need this sorts of programming, so we're looking at increasing that sort of programming, I think, across the province. We're still waiting to see, we will be waiting to see what happens with express entry, with individuals going directly into the workforce, but potentially still in need of training, unbeknownst potentially to the employers, so we will be ready to sort of fill those gaps as needed. And temporary foreign workers, we see that as a challenge as well, and their lack of ability to take and to move forward academically. We'd like to see if we can advocate to change that, but as it is now, they're able to take online courses, and that's an opportunity for colleges and universities, I think, to offer more online courses. And then finally, I would just say, international students, a huge challenge that we need to work with the settlement sector on, and also just programming in general. I think there's a lot more opportunity for us to cooperate across sectors. So that's it. That was very quick. So if you have any questions afterward, please let me know.